Creative Art Journaling, August Swap, Vintage Sewing, Art Journal page. The first segment of this video is a show and tell of the Vintage Sewing Art Journal page I created for swap at creativeartjournaling.com. The video can be ended at the end of the first segment if the show and tell is all that you are interested in seeing. The second segment is a fast-forward art-along process where I create the art journal page and discuss it in detail. Vintage sewing is one of my favorite things to use and to art journal. Okay, I want to do a show and tell. This is the vintage sewing page that I did for a swap in Creative Art Journaling. I'm getting ready to mail it out. I just finished it up today. The theme was vintage sewing, and I kind of wanted to make it steampunkish in a sense. So I found this snap card by Star Snap, and it's a vintage snap card, and on here it says the gem of the notions. So I took that phrase, the gem of the notions, and repeated it up here in black, and then I outlined it with white speedball ink with my dip pen, and it says gem of the notions. This will lift up, and underneath you can kind of see in here the back of the snap card, and I have a ladies home journal ad here and a map of the world under here, and then this is needlepoint canvas that has red blanket stitch around. Up here I have a segment of a leather belt that has eyelets in there and a metal charm and some metal brads, and I sewed a vintage button on it right here. It also is mounted on a piece of needlepoint canvas that is done with the blanket stitch in red crochet yarn. Up here is a tatted square that I set on its side so that it looks like a diamond, and a red button. Here I have a patch, a sewing patch that happens to say Canada. It's upside down, but that's okay because it's a leaf and it's falling like it would be in the fall. And I have some Seven Gypsies tape segments here, and a vintage piece of lace coming down the side. On around here I use my white ink again to create stitches, decorative stitches around the border. I have 3 vintage buttons that I sewed onto the sides. So this is the front. And then when you flip it over, this is the back. Now the back has, I had cut a stencil shape out of a vintage needlework magazine, and it's just the shape of a lady. She was modeling a dress of the style of 1906, I believe, and then I put my journaling information inside of that stencil. I also have the decorative stitches around the edge with my white speedball ink. I found the little tag that says made especially for you by, and I covered up the name because that was printed on the tag, and then using Tim Holtz little label letters I put my name of Meridel Abrams. And here again I have another Star Snap. I happen to have 2 of them with this. I think she's a very vintagey type person. I call her Wonder Snap Lady or something like that because she's got a star on there, and I edged that. You can't see it here, but I edged it with black stays-on, put it on a piece of red linen, and then attached it to the background. I have 2 flowers here that were made out of a purple zipper that had a nylon. The zipper was made out of nylon, the zipper portion. And I cut that in half, and I stitched them together and put red buttons into the center. That's all one zipper, but it's just the 2 sides of the zipper. I have a needle package here. I actually glued that together. I have a little piece of lace. This lace came from the top of this piece, and I just snipped it off and put it there. And then I have a little another little Canadian sewing patch from the Canadian Rockies, and inside of that I have a little tag that I made out of a top of a Dritz sew-on snaps. And that zipper, here's the zipper part, the pull part of the zipper, and I attached it to the top of that little tag right there. And then on the back I have a little ad that came out of that Ladies Home Journal magazine. So, and it fits right in here, just like that. And then I put the zipper part down so that it will stay in there. So this is the back. It's all ready to mail. All I have to do is make a photocopy of it and put it in the mail, and I'm going to do that today. This is the front. I'll just hold it here for a minute, or what I think to be a minute. A minute is actually longer than what one thinks it is. And then here is the back. Now I hope that you've enjoyed watching me create this. This is the end of the show and tell portion of the page. If you want to see me create it, continue on with this video. If you don't want to see how I created it, I do a fast forward process art along after this segment. So if you don't want to see this, now would be a good time to stop the video. But if you want to hear me talk about how this page was created and go through the fast forward, just continue watching. Okay, in this first segment, what I'm doing is I'm going to sort through this box of vintage sewing items I think I'm going to use. Here I have an 1893 Ladies Home Journal. Has a lot of vintage sewing, piece of lace. Everything I put to the left of my box there, I think that I'm going to use on my page. Piece of needlepoint canvas, part of a lace curtain, piece of fabric by Red Rooster, that's pattern fabric. I save it out, but I end up not using it. I have some zippers with the nylon threads. Have a belt there that has eyelets in it. I don't use it. Zippers, everything that I put to the right of my box, I do not end up using. It's more fun to go through these old sewing items and sort out things that you think that you can use on pages. And as you can see, I have an abundance of things that I can select from. There's some straight pins, some scrapbook paper. I have a part of a vintage belt there that's very steampunkish. More lace, some gold trim, package of buttons, more buttons, embroidery floss. Now I'm starting to put things that I did not want back into this box. I'll use those for another project at another time. I have plenty to choose from, believe me. And to the right of my box there, I have a plastic shoebox that I'm going to put my items in when I start working on my art journal page. You can see I empty it out into my box of vintage sewing items there. Coming up here, I'm just about getting to the end of it. There we go. Now, do you think that I can get all that onto an 8x10 journal page? Do you think that I can get it all into that plastic shoebox? Well, I do, and get it into the shoebox, but I have plenty to choose from for my art journal page. Okay, I'm getting ready to create my backgrounds. I'm going to spray through that piece of lace. I have some acrylic paint that I've mixed up with water. I have a blue one that I've saved off. I'm going to mix it with some white and with some coral blush. And I put some water in there, just mixing different consistencies, shaking it up real good. Decide I want some more coral blush in there. Not really sure what kind of a color that I get. It ends up being a grayish blue. It shows to be more blue on the page than it really is. Now I get out that piece of lace, deciding how I want to position it, decide that I'm going to do one page at a time. And when I spray it, it sprays a very concentrated stream of paint, but it turns out pretty nice on the first. I try to print it off on the back using up what I can, but that really did not work that well. Of course, the spray went every place and I have to clean off my water jars. So I put it in a different sprayer and I get a finer mist on the second and third page. And I'm much happier with this. And now I'm going to do the third one. There we go. Now I have 3 pages with that background. Now I'm putting my paint away. This is how I keep it. I've used a plastic wrap and an aluminum foil around it. Okay, I'm getting ready to start working on the background of my journal page. I use an 8x10 template to figure out the best placement of the design on my 8x10 journal page. I have 3 to choose from. I get out my dilution sprayings. I use a squeezed orange, a London blue, and the black. And I think I'm going to use my ballerina. I end up using the mask, and I decide that I want to spray with the squeezed orange in the background first because I want that to show through as part of the ballerina skirt. And then I spray around the mask with the London blue, and I'm happy with how that turned out. But I decide that this is a vintage sewing page, not a ballerina page, so I get out another mask of a lady that I cut from a 1906 Needlecraft magazine. And again, I spray around both of those with my London blue. And then I blot it off on the back of another page. Now I actually use that page where I blotted things off. I actually end up using this page as my real art journal page. But I continue working on the ballerina page because I want to experiment with spraying some homemade white spray wash through that curtain net. So I replaced my masks. And then I get out my homemade white spray wash and experiment with spraying through that white curtain. Now it's a very watery spray. I do not have enough white paint in there, so I dry it off and then I get out some more white paint and add to my spray wash. Add more white paint to it to give it a more of a white pigment color. And then here's where I'm shaking it up and adding it to my spray wash. And then I respray that again through my white net, and you can see I have more of a white pigment on my page. But the page is very wet, so I have to spend a little bit of time drying that page off before I can work on it more. Now, I'm very happy when I remove the masks. You can see I've got a nice ballerina and a lady showing through there. I put all 3 pages side by side, and then what I'm saying is that I'm going to set the dilution spray wash with some archival spray varnish as a fixative so that when I continue working on the page it won't run, and I'm using some glaze. Okay, now I'm getting ready to work on the final journal page, and I'm like the page with the squeezed orange on it, but it's not quite red enough for me, so I use some Deco Arts Dazzling Red Metallic, and you can still see the dazzling orange through there. The red is very transparent, so I'm happy with that effect. I'm not as happy with the red over the green. That's almost too Christmassy for me. So I get out some Deco Arts Dazzling Metallic, which is an espresso color. It's kind of a chocolate brownish gold color. And I'll paint over this entire page with the espresso. There's where I'm doing that. And I really like that because it looks like an aged brass copper background. So I'm just drying that off. And then I decide I want that lady to stand out a little bit more, so I paint through the stencil with some more of that dazzling metallic espresso, but I want it even darker, so I add some black plum, and that does the trick for me. And I remove my stencil and I'm kind of cleaning it off. Got a little white on the background down there toward the bottom, but as you can see, I just clean off my stencil and then I add some more of that espresso on it, and that solves that. Kind of touching her up. I'll be touching her up as I work on it. Now I'm working back on the front again, and I'm just kind of playing around with how I'm going to place my items on the page. And then I thought, well, now's a good time to trim it down. So I trim it to an 8 by 10 size. And that's why I used the template before, was to figure out now what part of this design do I actually want to be used on the page. And I'm happy with my choice, trimming it to 8 by 10 on both sides, distressing the edges. Now I'm going to start playing with the different laces, and that first lace that I chose was too thick, so I have found this row of vintage lace that just works perfect for this page. I found a star snap card with a lady that looks very steampunkish to me, and then that round brown segment of a belt that I disassembled. It has eyelets in it, very steampunkish. I have a piece of tatted lace and a Canadian sewing maple leaf sewing patch. So I'm just arranging the elements on different ways on the page. I end up using that needlepoint canvas as a background, and I decide that that star snap card belongs down there toward the bottom, and this is the arrangement I use in the end. So now I take everything off and decide how I'm going to have it look on the back, and that lace, I end up not putting that on the right side of the back. It kind of crowds everything off of the page. But I do find another star snap card that matches the one on the front, and I have another Canadian sewing patch card that I'm going to put a little tag in, and I have a little label that says "Made for You by," and I have some buttons that I'm going to sew on the side. So now I arrange everything on the front again. Okay, I'm getting ready to do some lettering, some journaling on the page. I pulled the phrase "Gem of the Notions" off of that star snap card. I'm going to repeat it up at the top of the page to the right of where the lace will be. I've already written it in black, and now I want to outline it in white. And I decided to try to use my dip pen and some speedball white ink to see how that white would flow on a page that's been glazed, and I'm very happy with the results. And I would recommend that if you're having trouble with your white ink showing up, that you try just getting a dip pen and some white speedball ink and using your white ink to outline your letters or to do your journaling. I actually do this on the back when I document my page too. In another segment on the video, I do go over this white ink again to make it more bold, and it wrote over itself just fine. I was very happy with the results, and I'll probably be using my white speedball ink to do my white journaling from now on. Happy with those results. Now I'm getting ready to glue down my white lace to on the left side of the page there. I'm just kind of rearranging things, seeing how I want the layout to be. I decide that I'm going to glue that white lace down using my Liquitex matte gel medium. That works very well, and it does hold it. So I attach that, and then I rearrange my items on my layout again. Those buttons are really too large. I decide to go with smaller buttons in the end. Okay, I did some work offline. I attached some buttons to the edge of my page. I worked on my needle snap card with some needlepoint canvas and the belt segment, and now I'm just kind of arranging things on the back of the page, thinking how I want the back to look. But before I do any more, I decide that I want to outline the silhouette of that lady with my white speedball ink, because this is going to be the journaling spot on the back of my page. So I really want that vintage lady silhouette form to stand out. I'll be documenting the name of the swap and my name and the date in that area. It'll be my journal spot. Dry it off so that I can work on the front again. Now here I am going over the white ink around the letters gem of the notions. I want that white of the ink to be just a little bit more bold. So I go over the white ink again with a second layer, and I found that worked very well. The white ink goes over itself just as I would expect it would. There's no scratching of the paint of the first layer of white ink. I found that worked very well. I'm very happy with my white speedball ink and my dip pen, and I'll probably be using that to do my white journaling on my pages from now on. Dry it off so that I can continue working on the page. Kind of arrange my elements again. I do this several times, make sure it's what I want. And then I decide that I want my snap card to pull up so that you can see the back of the snap card. So I'm going to attach a back of a card to the back of that needlepoint canvas. And I tried using the score tape first, but I found that I could actually pull that card right off. So I got out my needle and thread and actually sewed that card to the back of the needlepoint canvas, and that held it in place just as I expected it would. And it adds an element of vintage sewing to my page, which is vintage sewing. The theme is vintage sewing. So now I get out my score tape again, and I'm going to use that to attach, and I add some weld bond glue. I'm going to attach that snap card to the bottom of my page where I want it to go. And then I trim out from that same card. There's a map of the world that I trim, and then I get out my ladies' home journal and pull out an ad of a vintage lady right there, and I trim her out and fit her into the back of the card, right underneath the card too, so when you lift up that snap card you'll see those two elements, the map and the vintage lady. Now I put glue on there, but then I remember that I want to distress it, so I get out my StazOn ink and distress the edges, even though I have glue on the back. It's a little messy, but I put more glue on there and put it onto my needlepoint canvas underneath, and that works very well. Distress the vintage lady and put her on the underneath, and I'm happy with that. Now I'm placing the belt segment. I did some work offline on that too with the needlepoint canvas and the red crochet blanket stitch around there. I'm attaching it in the same way that I did my snap card, putting a cardboard on the end and putting some glue on the back, and then attaching that cardboard to the back of the page. Now I arrange my lace and my little Canadian leaf sewing patch. I had to kind of trim that down, put a red button in the center of that tatted lace, and glue my Canadian leaf sewing patch down. Okay, now I'm just showing off the front, showing where all the elements have been attached where I wanted them to go. And then I get out my white speedball ink pen and decide that I'm going to put some fake sewing stitches down the side, the running stitches, with using my white ink pen, my white dip pen, and my speedball ink. And I'm just having all sorts of fun with this white ink pen. And to me this just says vintage sewing all over the place. Adding that. And then the running stitches aren't enough. I have to add some little star stitches to them, and that just really dresses up the page, in my opinion. I would be doing the same thing if I were embroidering on this page, only instead of embroidering with a needle, I'm embroidering with my white ink pen. And this is what art journaling is about, doodling and figuring out where things go. And in the end, it just, if you work at it, it all comes together. Now I'm just drying everything off because I want to flip my page over and work on the back. Now I'm just showing off some of the elements that I put on the back. I made this little tag with the zipper pull on it. So proud of that. I'm doing some journaling in the silhouette form of that lady. That's where I'm documenting the page with my name and the name of the swap and the date. Vintage sewing. So now I'm adding the same stitches on the front as I did on the back with my running stitches, and then I'll do the little decorative stitches on them. You can see where I used the zipper to make little purple flowers, little dimensional purple flowers, and put the red buttons on there, and I have that little sewing label made for you especially by, and then it was by Mary somebody or other, and my name is not Mary somebody or other. My name is Meridel Abrams, so I used Tim Holt's little label letters and put my name on that little sewing label and went over that with my glossy accents. Just added a special touch to the page. So there you go. There's the back. It matches the front. The last thing that I do is I have this 7 Gypsies tape measure, black tape measure tape, and I cut off some of the numbers, and then I attach them to where the threads are attached through that button, and it just adds a sewing element to the page and adds a little black contrast. And I also do that on the front of the page. So there is my August vintage sewing page for swap, and I really hope that you have enjoyed watching me create this page. And if you have, please subscribe to my channel, because I plan to be doing more of these pages in the future.